Hello, everybody, and welcome to 52 Weeks of Leadership. My name is Molly Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the UB Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Geico, for this series, and for everyone who's been joining us around the world, week in and week out. We're already at week 41, and we're thrilled to have with us Lee Williams. She is the General Counsel and Director of Business Development at Dent Neurological Institute. Her topic today is engaging your multi-generational workplace, a very timely topic. She comes to us with a JD MBA from the University of Buffalo. She has been an adjunct law professor in the UB Law School, and she also serves as a Leader Core coach in our MBA program. We can't wait for her to get started. So listen in and be ready to ask some questions at the end. All right, Lee, ready to go?
Yes, thank you so much. All set? Okay. Make sure I have my controls ready here. All right. So thank you so much, Molly and Jim. I'm so excited to be sharing this hour with you today. I'm really honored to be included in this 52-week series. I'm kind of floored that it's week 41 of 52. We're really kind of rounding out 2021 already, and I'm still really struggling with that fact, but for those of us that work to improve on our leadership skills regularly and focus on our personal development, I really find that this series has been a perfect way of scheduling it, sort of your SMART goal of a little bit of leadership training for yourself every week. I love that it's on a Monday and then it's recorded, so you can either schedule it into your lunch hour or watch those videos once they get posted, if we're lucky enough to have them posted. So if you haven't already delved into the other 40 plus weeks of these presentations, there's certainly something for everyone in each one of them, and it's such an amazing resource for us. So thank you to Chloe and thank you to Geico for making that possible. So like Molly said, our topic today is going to be engaging our multi-generation workforces. I have had a lot of recent sort of interaction with this idea, and I thought it was just a really salient topic for today. So a brief agenda here, and I'll start by saying that, like all diversity and inclusion initiatives, that there's no one size fits all school of thought, right? There's, my goal is that at the end of this presentation that you're thinking about ways to either start or strengthen your approach to age diversity and generational diversity in your organizations and among your teams. So ideally, we're incorporating some of these principles into the way you lead. So we're going to start with talking about the labor force itself, get into age stereotypes and generational conflict, and eventually get into sort of harnessing that diversity for success in your organization, and as well as diversity and inclusion programs for engagement. So at the end, we'll have a little discussion on that as well. So our changing labor force, I'm going to start with some statistics here. Our workforce in the United States is changing. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the labor force participation rate is expected to increase fastest in those two blue bars on there. Those are the oldest segments of the population, most notably in the 65 to 74 range, and then the 75 and up through 2030. So in contrast, those participation rates for most of the other large segmented age groups are pretty much what you'd expect. They're really not projected to change much over the next decade, especially in that central, this is who you'd be expecting to work in that 20 to 64 before retirement age range. So this increase up here in the blue bars, it's fueled by that baby boomer generation, and that includes, for reference, those born between 1946 and 1964. But by 2024, baby boomers will have reached ages 60 through 78, and some of them are expected to continue working after they qualify for Social Security benefits. That's just what we're seeing these days. And what we're going to be seeing is a greater number of seniors in our workplaces. So that's going to be the foreseeable future for us. So why is that? Well, First, people are working later in life for a number of reasons. Americans have a longer life expectancy than previous generations, and that's allowing us to be healthier and more engaged as time goes on into later ages. So we're staying healthier for longer, essentially. The aging generations are also better educated than prior generations, which increases their likelihood of staying in the workforce longer. And, finally, those Social Security benefits, right? Those changes to Social Security benefits, changes to retirement plans, pension plans, et cetera, are incentivizing people to stay on the job as well. So if you think about the rising costs of living in the United States, as those go up, it's requiring people to have more in savings in order to eventually retire comfortably. So that could take a little bit longer and also incentivize people to remain in the workforce. I'll share a quick personal story on this. I was raised by two attorneys, two baby boomers, and a couple of years ago, I attended a court-sponsored sort of memorial service. This is going to sound a little bit dismal, but it's not. And it was a service for attorneys who passed away over the course of the previous year. What shocked me about all these different vignettes of these individuals was that the number of stories of these practitioners whose families talked about their practicing law until a matter of days, or even just a matter of 1 or 2 days before they passed away. So weeks to days. So sure, for a lot of these individuals, the income was nice, but many of them were practicing still because they were still engaged, vibrant, passionate advocates for their clients who were depending on them, and who challenged them to do work that continued to interest them and give them purpose. So I'm talking about people right now who were well into their 80s, and we can assume that many of them could afford to retire, but as they're making important contributions based on their experience and the knowledge that they've developed through decades of practicing law, why not continue to share their vast experience and their knowledge? So just a personal anecdote there. So I'll look at our workforce overall. Let's get a sense for that. This is based on 2017 data, so there's an update coming soon based on last year's census data. A quick note, the birth years on all of these, they sort of shift depending on which source you're using. So allow a couple of years for leeway for these groupings if you've seen a different generation, or maybe you're on the edge and you fall into one or another and you're surprised by the spans that are listed here. So it's also kind of a nice reminder that generations are not defined by a specific moment that starts and stops. It's, as we'll discuss, we can kind of poke holes in various generational stereotypes and things of that nature. So, these characteristics are roughly broad strokes, and their definitions are certainly a useful heuristic for us in terms of conceiving of our workforce and who it's made up by, but it's really just to give us a sense of proportion. So another quick caveat, if you're expecting that I'm going to take you through profiles of each generation and talk about the historic events that probably shaped their worldviews, that's not what I want to focus on today. There are plenty of online resources to provide sort of those broad stroke characteristics. And it's sort of to define the sort of personality profiles of these generations, their preferences for technology and communication style, their views on authority and workplace behaviors, et cetera. But they can start to feel a little bit like astrological signs to me. It's definitely not a one size fits all definition for everyone. And so I've included a couple of facts here for each, but that I thought were pretty helpful, but we can go into that. So traditionalists in the silent generation, 1922 to 1945, 40% are smartphone users. And I think that's both simultaneously a little bit of a surprisingly high and surprisingly low number, depending on sort of what we're thinking of in terms of the use of a smartphone. They still hold 11 US Senate seats, only one in comparison for the millennial population, which, as you see, is a much larger proportion of our workforce. So just an interesting thing there. And I listed both. You'll see them named as traditionalists and also silent generation. The silent generation is interesting because Time Magazine used that term in 1951. And what they wrote, and I'll read the quote, it says, the most startling fact about the younger generation is its silence. With some rare exceptions, youth is nowhere near the rostrum. By comparison with the flaming youth of their fathers and mothers, today's younger generation is still a small flame. It doesn't issue manifestos, make speeches, or carry posters. It's been called the silent generation. I know so many seniors who fit into that group, and I could not disagree more with that characterization from 1951. So it's interesting that it's carried, another 70 years onwards in terms of what defines them. And again, just another way of undermining that these definitions as they're written. So baby boomers, 1946, 1964, the couple things I included there, 10,000 baby boomers reach retirement age every day. And I shared that fact a couple weeks ago at work among a generationally diverse group, but I was challenged as to whether or not I was making a statement of fact or a suggestion to some of the people in the room. So I guess I failed to read the room on that factoid. The second thing I thought was interesting about baby boomers is that they're now the second largest generation alive. For so long, we knew that they were this huge proportion of the population, but they were overtaken by millennials in 2019. That brings us to Generation X, which is a full third of our workforce, 1965 to 1980. They're interesting because they suffered the worst losses during the economic crisis in the 2008-2009 time period, but they were the only generation to actually recover that wealth lost, and during the pandemic itself had a boost of 50% to their wealth. So interesting how those historic events can be impactful and then later almost have the reversal of fortune. Millennials, 35% of our workforce. 1981 to 1996, I've seen that number completely, go up to 2000 and shift downwards as well. They're making up 75% of our global workforce by 2025, which is right around the corner. There's a common stereotype I hear about millennials that a lot of them still live with their parents, but 15% of them, age 25 to 35, are living at home. So it's not a huge proportion of millennials. Generation Z is also another small corner of our workforce. They're called digital natives, meaning that they're the first generation for which technology and the internet is completely ubiquitous. They were completely, from the time they were born into an internet age. They're the most racially and ethnic diverse of any generation before them, and they were also the hardest hit by COVID-19 job losses and pay cuts. So one of the reasons I wanted to put this up like this is it's not at all that rare to find employees working together who have over 40 years of an age difference between them. They may differ in the way that they behave, the way that they dress, how they spend their time, and certainly how they communicate. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So generational differences, stereotypes, and conflicts. The research has shown that workplaces are full of inaccurate age-related stereotypes and meta-stereotypes. A stereotype is what we think about in terms of others based on a characteristic. For example, young people are self-obsessed or selfie-obsessed. And a meta-stereotype is what we think others think about us. So it's essentially what we're projecting onto the perceptions of others. Certainly the era that we grow up in does shape our worldview and our view of work itself. Research suggests that, we are completely driven by these stereotypes and meta-stereotypes. The common bias around technology is another one to sort of relate this to. Gen Z and millennials rely heavily on text and email communication and hate to have, be the ones to order the pizza on the phone, while Gen X and baby boomers and that silent generation really prefer in-person communication. That's sort of the common bias that you hear, that's sort of the expectation, but in reality, research is showing that all generations prefer to have critical communications, especially those workplace related to compensation and performance in person. So the tie between generational stereotypes and interpersonal conflict with low engagement and productivity is a huge issue. And that research confirms that those stereotypes and meta-stereotypes are there. Probably means that we have dual issues going on here. People are both projecting generational stereotypes onto others and then also perceiving generational stereotypes being projected onto themselves. So we're probably making all kinds of bad assumptions about one another. There's also a lot here that's going on with the dynamics around power and authority and control, especially when it comes to age. As far back as 2014, it was 38% of Americans had a boss who was younger than they are. And of that 38%, I think it's 16% had an age gap of over 10 years in terms of that youthful person in a more senior role. So if you have, age stereotypes that are sort of rampant in your organization, it's really not a surprise, especially when it comes to hierarchy and experience and job qualifications and roles that conflict arises. Forget about communication styles and how we interact with each other. It can be as simple as just how you've structured your organization from the jump. So it could be even just the framework of how your hierarchy is set up before you even get to the interpersonal relationships and communication styles. So a quick study I just wanted to know, age stereotypes have critical implications. There was a Harvard study done that showed that individuals training older employees on a new computer skill had lower expectations and provided actually worse training when training than compared with training a younger person. So they, didn't work as hard to make sure that they were expected at the same performance levels. They expected them to be a little bit slower and not fully grasp the task itself. So if you think about the implications for that in your organization, I mean, just a stereotype in terms of that age difference is going to lead to inferior training, reduced learning, and then that has the potential to weaken job performance for any of those individuals who were trained. And it clearly is a lower performance for those training. It's just a really stark example of how those expectations sort of undermine the efforts that we put forth, especially when connecting, training, and working together on multifunctional teams. So is age really the issue? The research that we've seen on age and generational differences, it actually shows that those differences are quite small. People might experience completely different life stages and needs and the goals that they have for their careers. But those differences are really more dependent on their personal circumstances rather than their generation. And research shows that it is supported, or I'm sorry, that it's not supported, that those generational divides truly are what's causing the conflict. So it's actually more likely that it's the belief that differences exist rather than those differences themselves creating those conflicts. So what do we do with that? We know that generational conflict has the potential to really hinder organizational goals, but we also know that generational diversity, or as I'm going to start calling it here, age diversity, really helps us. It boosts organizational performance. It can help reduce our turnover. And studies have found that worker productivity is higher in companies with those mixed age work teams. Age diversity within teams is positively related to performance when groups are involved in complex decision-making tasks. So surprise, surprise, greater diversity can be directly aligned with organizational productivity. It is a good thing. However, according to some reports, only 8% of companies are actually including age diversity as a component of their diversity and inclusion strategies. So what can leaders do here? Life stages are such a big source of differences among employees. For example, having children or not having children can really drive an employee's interaction with working from home, or sort of that hybrid model, their hours, their compensation and benefit packages, and certainly the demands on their time. But if we recognize that people are going through changes in life stages, if we recognize that their interests may change, their priorities may change, as long as we're having those ongoing dialogues with our employees about their needs and expectations, we do have to sort of overcome those life change or life stage frictions. So leaders can really talk openly about generational stereotypes and meta stereotypes. Let's call them out. Let's, we can kind of joke about some of them, especially on the technology front, but let's share some stories among age diverse employees to help each other really recognize where those biases are and call them out when they're happening. We can also emphasize shared goals and commonalities. We're really not trying to divide into generational us and them. And I hear these comments all the time. Millennials are ruining the housing market. Baby boomers are staying in the workforce for too long. I hear these all the time. So when we divide into those groups, we're really sort of tearing at the fabric of what makes your organizational goals something that connects all of us, right? So that thread and that purpose-driven work that we should all be striving towards together. So let's not allow those generational stereotypes to distract from the true sources of conflict either, right? When there's issues with authority or issues with control, we need to delve into what exactly is the reason for that, and not make it about an age difference or a generational difference. So we need to be showing that both older individuals and younger individuals and everybody in between, everyone's part of the team working towards a shared outcome. And the emphasis then is not on the us versus them, it's still on that we. So focusing on deepening connections and creating opportunities with employees. We want to be meeting employees where they are. We want to be knowing what their circumstances are, what their expectations are, what their growth opportunities are. We really want to meet them at that point and not factor in some of these generational considerations. So we want to be aware of those generational stereotypes, especially when we're structuring organizational programs or teams, making sure that we have diverse representation, making sure that options and choices aren't selected to only one or two generations or sort of the majority. And we want to recognize that everybody has something to contribute regardless of age. And that regardless of age phrase is so important at every stage. We often hear that younger professionals should listen and learn rather than putting forth their ideas. And often we hear that older employees are either out of touch or less essential to the future or the vision of the organization. We need to insist that those notions could not be farther from the truth. And we have to benefit from the diversity of our perspectives, of our collective perspectives. So recognizing that everyone has something to contribute regardless of age. And that takes place in embracing unique differences. We're really harnessing the value of our differences rather than, letting them divide us. And we want to be blending our teams and our projects based on individual wants and needs, but also focusing on abilities, skills, experience, knowledge, and making sure that you've got a variety of all, especially when you're coming to really complex organizational issues. Finally, recruiting talent from a variety of generations and backgrounds. We tend to think of certain positions is only eligible for certain age groups. It's a natural tendency to have, but we really have to fight against that and make opportunities available to people based on their skills and experience. Certainly, I'm not saying, put somebody with 3 master's degrees in an entry level position. That doesn't seem right, but truly focusing on qualifications that aren't related to your generational experience. So some various programs that we can embrace and strengthen our age diversity in our organizations. We want to be including experienced senior members of the organization in training and leadership programs that helps to infuse the robust knowledge at the top all the way into the entry level positions, and making sure that they're coming in the front doors to benefit from the experience from those who've been here for longer, or at least in the workplace for much longer. We want to be creating cross-generational mentorship opportunities to foster coaching and relationships, teamwork, and mutual understanding. That one for me is something that we do really well at Dent. It's an important thing to encourage our newcomers and our new professionals to interact with physicians at Dent who've been here for decades, and to learn from them and to benefit from the many decades of neurological care that we've provided, and sort of infuse that back into our call center, right? The people who interact with patients sort of on that front line of picking up a phone. We encourage day-to-day mentorship between senior and less experienced employees. This is something we're certainly working on, but we got a really great look at that last week from Dean Teslick on facilitating shared leadership and helping team members try on management tasks without sort of overburdening them. But it's a great playbook for doing this, making sure that there's that added layer of age diversity kind of sprinkled in. Finally, a program that would help your organization invest in training programs. So continuous learning for your employees. You want to keep your organization relevant and make every team member a lifelong learner. Lifelong learners, in quotes, it was one of the stereotypes that they associate with baby boomers, but that's something we want all of our employees to be engaged in. What new programs can we offer, even free of charge, new resources, pretty much making any kind of resource or learning opportunity available to as many people within our organization as possible to help drive that relevancy and that ability to innovate and stay relevant. So now we've talked a lot about what we could do and how to do it. Let's do a little bit of self-evaluation here. So I was talking a little bit about Dent there for a minute, and I'll say that age definitely plays a significant role at Dent Neurologic Group, where I work. We're the largest outpatient neurology practice in the United States. We're a physician-led organization, so it's a partner-led, physician partner-led organization. So we're essentially, though, we're a doctor's office, right? And we have a range of ages among our partners. I think we're between age 41 to 73 in terms of partner owners of our business. And among the executive team, which includes myself, we range from 32 all the way up to 62. So I think the average age at Dent is 33. So, you know, if you think of where that falls in the line of individuals and where that falls in terms of how we're representing our average employee and those along the spectrum in both directions, it clearly is something, a practice or an organization that leans towards experience and service to our clients, which are essentially our patients. So some of our physician partners have been at Dent for 40 years, and some of our administrative team members have been here for upwards of 35. So we do have a culture in which tenure and experience and contribution to the practice, those are all central tenets among the leadership here. So Larry Zielinski's program a few weeks ago, though, really highlighted the changes in healthcare and what a critical time it is in the healthcare ecosystem with so many changes happening. So Dent, especially as an outpatient practice, we have this incredible need to be agile and to be creative, and the physicians here recognize that. So the embracing the energy and the innovation of younger professionals, it's really welcome here. So they do embrace a lot of that contribution from our younger generations across all teams. So here we definitely do strive to create consensus on our strategic goals, and that consensus is required to take in perspectives from all ages. So it's a nice sort of culture that we have of doing that here, but in terms of formulating what those programs are from the D&I perspective, that's really where we need to strengthen. We have right now an independent recognition team with very diverse participants, and they run a committee to recognize employees from all departments and levels of the organization. So that ranges from, you know, sending an employee a Starbucks gift card all the way up to a handwritten thank you from the CEO. So just a couple different notes about my organization, and one interesting note that came up recently is we looked at our benefits programs, and we have a very generous 401k and benefit package here. However, our entry level employees just they're not romanced by a 401k. You know, they're really looking for different levels of compensation, and that's actually something that's not held true in terms of stereotypes they say about Gen Z. They're supposed to be very financially savvy individuals who are really driven to understand the benefit packages from a corporation. And in our terms, that has not been the case with our new hires. So we're trying to find different ways to attract and represent them as a generation and make sure that they're aware of those benefits, but then also be aware of where are they looking for additional compensation or benefit packages? What kind of incentives are they looking for that sort of check their boxes? So just another stereotypes are just that, just stereotypes. So, and I think it bears a little bit of self-evaluation, me personally. Clearly I'm wearing the hello, my name is a millennial name tag here, but you know, I don't necessarily align with many of the stereotypes that you hear about millennials. I don't care for avocado toast. I don't use social media, probably save LinkedIn. I'm terrible at returning a text message. And, I voted in every general election since I turned 18. So, for what I own a home, but, it's in terms of all the stereotypes that they have about millennials, I'm not really representing those very much in the millennial category, but, I'm certainly lucky that I identify as, a Dent leader, a manager here, and a team member, certainly before I identify as a millennial. And I'm trying to push that perspective down into all of the teams that I work with. So I'm aware of my own meta stereotypes on that. I'm aware of the fact that I'm considered a millennial, or I'm aware of the fact that I think I'm considered a millennial at many different stages, and that how I may be perceived based on my age. But those are all principles that I'm still working on and improving on. So let's then turn it back to you, and let's take a couple of minutes to sort of wrap up and self-evaluate, and maybe you can send me some of your comments in the chat. So I'd like you to first sort of think about your leadership team or your immediate peers in your organization, and what experiences do you collectively represent, right? Like sort of what are the broad definitions from the group that you sit on, and what is the thread or that central identity that ties you all together. Second, think of who you are leading. What generations, what experiences are you representing? Or do your teams represent moreover? And what are the topics that pose potential for significant generational divide that you're working through? Is it wages and compensation? Is it opportunities for advancement among teams or teammates? Is it your paid time off or your sick leave policy? If that's something you work on, what are the topics that are sort of driving potential conflicts or potential divide? And are those topics mission critical? How can your team address those issues and develop a framework to consider all of those backgrounds and experiences? Is it possible to provide greater opportunities or greater options and choices for your teams depending on what their life experience is? So in the chat, if you want to send me a couple comments, go ahead and do that. It could be a simple yes if you see generational differences really impacting your workplace and your culture, those dynamics and those programs, or if it really aren't as impactful, that would be great to hear as well. What programs does your organization have in place that might speak to these issues?
Thank you, Lee. And while people are reflecting and adding their comments and questions to the chat, I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned that Generation Z was hardest hit by COVID pandemic. We know that emotional distress is a factor in workplaces too. Do you find that impacting any particular generation more than others?
I think we expected it to, based on exactly what you just said. I think we see a lot of social media and COVID especially sort of exacerbating those mental health issues in that generation. But I'll be honest, I mean, it's almost one of those threads that does connect us all, that we've all really struggled. And I think mental health is on the upward tick for every generation, not just that younger Gen Z. I think it's a really prevalent issue that certainly cross-cuts the age divide.
Well, thank you for your emphasis on we and purpose. It's a great message around leadership, and that you de-emphasize the generational stereotypes. We have a question from Sujatha. How do you create a culture that encourages different focus at different stages of career? For example, how to focus senior workers on mentoring and less on productivity or sales? Can use compensation systems to encourage different behavior at different stages.
So one of the things that we're striving to do at Dent is really develop, it goes back to what I said before about meeting people where they are. Some people want to be leaders but not be managers, and some people want to be, subject matter experts. That isn't necessarily going to be, overseeing a number of direct reports. And maybe their focus is productivity or sales, right? That's that strength and weakness analysis that we need to be able to do as leaders, and not just say you've been here 15 years, you need to be managing at least 15 people, right? those are the types of things that you're not meeting your employees on their interests and their hobbies. You're really sort of putting them into buckets of if it's most convenient or the most sense for you as an organization. So Sujata asked a compound question here. And I think that's sort of on the focusing on different stages of career. I think it's a personal journey and making sure that you're creating opportunities for everybody on an individual basis, not necessarily some rigid framework. Can you use compensation systems to encourage different behavior at different stages? I think you absolutely can, but it's not always about compensation, right? I think it's also about flexibility. I think it's about driving people into their interests. It's about mobility, and it's not always upward mobility. It can also be from side to side, increasing people's experience on something that's sort of adjacent, but not necessarily above or below what they're already looking at. And I did want to just go to the next slide here. It just kind of to send this home, and then I can go through some of the other comments. The bottom line that I have is that across all 5 generations in our workplace, there's more similarities that we share than differences. And we should understand these generational divides, but we do want to focus on people as individuals first and foremost. We all want respect. We all want to do meaningful work. We all want opportunities for growth, whatever Sujata just kind of underlined, what does growth look like for each individual? We all want fair compensation for our contributions, and we want flexibility for the most part in our work-life balance. So that's sort of what I'm trying to drive home here is it's important to be aware of, but not necessarily what should be driving your interactions with, as a leader to many different teams, or just as you as a coworker. This is just as basic as you and the person next to you, and making sure that we're not jumping to conclusions and we're respecting everybody's individuality and their own unique contributions.
Well, thank you. That's a great wrap up. Really appreciate the time and effort you put into this presentation. It certainly is timely, and you did an excellent job. I just want to also let everybody know to join us next week for Dr. Aisha O'Malley. She's going to be talking about social identity, and you won't want to miss that. So you're welcome to stay on and check the comments. For the rest of you, we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.